Snow fell thick over the streets of Brooklyn, laying a quiet white blanket across red brick rooftops and salt-stained sidewalks. Behind the glass fogged with cold, a small bookstore glowed with a gentle golden light, like a warm lantern in the midst of a harsh winter. Maya Carter stood behind the counter, her slender hands neatly arranging a stack of new books delivered that morning. Each hardback still carried the fresh scent of ink, mingling with the faint trace of cinnamon from the cup of cocoa cooling on the table, creating that familiar fragrance customers often called the warm smell of home. Her brown hair was tied back, though a few loose strands fell across her face, partly concealing the tired eyes of many sleepless nights. At 27, Maya had a softness that made others want to pause and talk, but in the depth of her gaze lingered a sorrow that had no name. On an armchair by the window, Sophie, a 5-year-old girl with softly curled brown hair and wide, glassy eyes, sat curled up, her little legs swinging as she leaned over a worn fairy tale book, crayons scattered at her side. She was coloring in the princess's gown with a bright pink shade, humming a childish tune under her breath. From time to time, Sophie glanced up at her mother, her curious eyes checking, as if to be sure Mommy was still there, still smiling, still her only anchor in a world far too big. Outside, the snowfall grew heavier. A few customers drifted in, brushing snow from their coats, settling into fabric chairs in search of warmth and quiet. The bookstore was never noisy, only the rustle of turning pages and the steady tick of the wall clock. But it was precisely that stillness which made the place feel like a refuge for those weary of the city's relentless noise. The bell above the door chimed again. Maya looked up out of habit, intending only a polite smile. But the moment the man stepped inside, the air itself seemed to hesitate. He was tall, straight-backed, wrapped in a long overcoat speckled with melting snow, his black hair swept back, his handsome face carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to standing in places of power. As he brushed snow from his shoulders, the bookstore's golden light caught the edges of the suit beneath his coat, making him stand out all the more in the humble room. Ethan Blake. A name once whispered in the pages of financial news, tied to ruthless investments. But for Maya, he was not just a successful CEO. He was the past, the memory she had buried 5 years ago, the memory she had tried to convince herself was nothing more than a dream that had gone out. Her throat tightened. The hardback in her hands turned rigid under her grip until her fingers blanched white. She hadn't even drawn breath when Sophie, still busy with her coloring, suddenly lifted her head. The little girl stared at the stranger who had just walked in. Her eyes narrowed, then lit up as though she had recognized something. Without a second's hesitation, Sophie dropped her crayons, hopped off the chair, and ran toward him. Ethan was lowering his head, pulling off his gloves, unaware, until a small, clear voice rang out across the stillness. "Are you the man from Mommy's stories?" Everything stopped. A few customers turned to look, smiling with a mix of surprise and delight. Maya froze behind the counter, her heart hammering wildly. The book slipped from her fingers and landed on the wooden surface with a sharp thud. Sophie's innocent question still echoed in Maya's mind. But instead of answering, her thoughts were pulled back to 5 years ago, to a time when everything had not yet fallen apart. It was an April afternoon on Columbia's campus. Sunlight poured down on the lawn behind the library, warm enough that students spread their coats out to lie on, reading and chatting in low voices. Maya sat off in a corner, a novel open on her lap. She had a habit of jotting little verses in the margins, a childish quirk, one only she knew. A shadow fell across the page. A familiar male voice spoke, half teasing, half serious. "Are you planning to turn the syllabus into a poetry collection?" Maya looked up and met the mischievous, bright eyes of Ethan Blake. His black hair was tousled after a basketball game, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Without waiting for permission, He dropped down beside her. Maya tried to sound stern, better than yawning through macroeconomics. Ethan laughed aloud, that easy laughter Maya secretly loved, as though the world had never been heavy. From that day on, it was as if two orbits had accidentally collided and stuck together. Ethan often left little notes tucked inside the library books Maya borrowed. For the girl who makes silence sound like music, one scribble like that had left her blushing the entire evening. Their student years were bound to the simplest things: styrofoam cups of ramen wolfed down at midnight, bursts of laughter while squeezing into the subway at rush hour, nights sitting under strings of tiny lights draped across the campus, hands brushing, then clasping as a wordless confession. To Ethan, Maya was no longer the scholarship girl, but the one person he truly wanted to tell everything to. And to Maya, for the first time in her life, she felt seen, valued, not forced to prove her worth. But that sweet love could not escape judgment. The first time Maya met Maxwell Blake, Ethan's father, was at an opulent charity gala. Ethan had taken her hand, introduced her boldly. "This is Maya, my girlfriend." Maxwell did not smile, nor say anything outright. Just a single glance, cold, measuring, enough to strip Maya of all sense of worth. Later that night, Ethan repeated his father's words. "She's a distraction, and distractions ruin men who are meant to lead." Ethan dismissed it. He held Maya and insisted, "I won't let anyone separate us. You are part of my future." And Maya believed him, for in his eyes was a resolve she had never seen in anyone else. But Maxwell did not stop at one glance or one remark. His opposition seeped into every decision Ethan faced. A supplementary scholarship Ethan had suddenly came under review. His internship schedule on Wall Street, once a free choice, was suddenly rebranded a prerequisite for inheritance. Invitations, meetings, every occasion circled around one idea. Ethan was the heir, and preparation had to begin now. Maya saw Ethan begin to tire. At first, he resisted with his usual humor. Then silence took its place. Many nights they sat together, Ethan sketching a crude floor plan of a small apartment. Arrows marked "your bookshelf corner," clinging to a modest dream. But as graduation neared, reality grew sharper. He was being pulled away from her. A week before commencement, they met beneath the old tree where they had once promised each other everything. No smiles, no banter. Ethan stood tense, his face tight. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Wall Street, and maybe London." Maya choked. "And what about everything we promised?" Ethan gripped her hand, his eyes trembling. "I tried. I swear I tried. But if I refuse, I lose everything. Even my mother gets dragged into it." He handed her an envelope. "I can't say it to your face. What I want you to know. It's in here." He lowered his head, pressed a trembling kiss to her forehead, the kiss of someone who did not want to let go but was forced to. Then he turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, until his figure disappeared among the trees. Maya remained for hours, the envelope in her hand, too afraid to open it. When she finally looked up, the string lights across the campus lawn were glowing, sparkling like dreams now far beyond reach, and for the first time, she understood. Love, no matter how deep, could still be broken by forces colder than winter itself. Maya sat for a long time beneath the old Columbia tree, after Ethan had walked away. On her lap lay the envelope he had left. She turned its edge over and over, drew in a deep breath, and did not open it. Some vague instinct told her that if she read it, everything would harden into a merciless full stop. She slipped the envelope into her notebook, the one where she scribbled stray verses, and pressed a dried wildflower beside it, picked on a May afternoon. A few weeks later, her body began to change. At first, Maya blamed stress, but when nausea came each morning, when her cycle failed to arrive, She bought a test. 2 red lines appeared. Maya sank onto the cold dormitory bathroom tiles, hearing her heart pound as if it would tear through her chest. She pressed a hand to her stomach, still flat, yet suddenly the center of an entirely new universe. That night, she opened her laptop. She typed emails to Ethan at every address she had, his school account, the personal one they had once used to share assignments. Then a second email, a third, no reply. She called his phone. The line led only to a hollow recording. "Your call is important to us." The next morning, Maya went to Ethan's dorm. The receptionist said he had checked out and left no forwarding address. She hurried to the economics department, asked his closest classmates. They only shook their heads. "He's on rotation. His schedule's packed. No way to reach him." The day after, Maya went to the Blake Corporation headquarters in Midtown. The receptionist smiled politely, impenetrable as a wall. "You'll need an appointment." She left a handwritten note. Her number, her email. Silence. She wrote another long letter and sent it to the Blake residence on the Upper East Side. The doorman accepted it, promised to deliver. The next day it came back, sealed with a printed slip. Recipient not available. 3 days later, she tried the house again. The doorman said the family had gone abroad for a long stay. Maya had searched until her legs gave out, until every bus route and subway stop felt etched into her bones. At night, she opened her notebook. The envelope still lay there unopened. She placed her hand on her stomach, whispered to the tiny life inside, "You are the last thing left from that love, and I will protect you." From then on, her decisions became clear. Maya withdrew from her courses, left school quietly. No graduation ceremony, no farewell party, only a small suitcase, a few favorite books, and the notebook with the envelope pressed inside. She chose Brooklyn, a corner of the city where no one knew her, where she could begin again without the past glaring into her eyes each day. The attic room she rented sat above an old grocery shop. The paint peeled, the ceiling groaned, the window looked out onto a street cluttered with neon signs. On the corner stood a second-hand bookstore. Maya asked for part-time work. The owner, a stern but kind woman, saw her diligence and gradually trusted her. The months of pregnancy were a string of labor and notes, riding buses to checkups, carefully writing down the doctor's instructions in her notebook, shelving, dusting, learning to make cocoa for regular customers. At night, she was exhausted, but her hand still rested on the notebook as if it were a lifeline. One evening, under the yellow glare of her desk lamp, Maya did not open a fairy tale book. At the urging of the unborn child, she began telling Mommy's stories, fragments of memory with no names. A boy who always rolled his sleeves up when he laughed, who counted steps on the Brooklyn Bridge to steady her on windy nights, who liked to tuck notes into library books, whose winter coat carried the faint scent of pine. She told and retold them to the baby in her belly, a lullaby made of recollection. Then that winter night arrived. In a brightly lit hospital room, a newborn cry rang out, fragile yet resolute. Maya cradled her daughter, tears falling not for loss, but for the purest new joy. She named her Sophie, a prayer that the little girl would grow with light in her eyes, no matter the harshness of the world. The years that followed revolved entirely around Sophie. In the mornings, Maya rose early to make pancakes from the cheapest ingredients, always arranged neatly to delight her child. By day she worked in the bookstore. By night she read fairy tales mixed with Mommy's stories, gentle memories of the boy who once made her laugh beneath campus lights. Sophie grew up with these nameless tales, full only of small, repeated details. A white scar on a knuckle from basketball, the habit of rolling up sleeves, the steady rhythm of steps on a long bridge. There were nights when Sophie slept soundly and Maya opened the drawer, took out the notebook. The envelope was still there, its edges yellowed with time. She touched it lightly, then closed it again. In the glow of the desk lamp, she whispered, "You went so far away, but in her, I still see you." And so, the unopened envelope and Mommy's stories together became a fragile bridge between a love cut short and the new life Maya was forced to walk forward into. Alone, yet never completely lonely, Sophie's clear little voice rang out again, pulling everyone back to the present. "Are you the man from Mommy's stories?" The girl stood in the middle of the aisle, her cheeks flushed warm, her wide eyes shining. Her voice was so bright and certain that the entire shop went silent. The middle-aged man flipping through a book froze. The elderly woman near the window lifted her gaze. The air thickened, leaving only that question echoing through the room. Ethan startled, glancing down at the child. Those round, luminous eyes, light brown and glass clear, catching the glow of the lamps, stunned him into stillness. A strange familiarity pierced straight into his chest. Sophie took another half-step closer, her voice firmer now, her small hand tugging up the sleeve of her sweater. "Mommy said there was a man who always rolled up his sleeves like this, and that man wrote little notes inside books. Mommy said he made her laugh, right under the strings of lights in the schoolyard." Ethan froze. His hand, almost without thinking, rolled his sleeve back. The old habit had never left, and there, across his knuckle, the small white scar was still visible, exactly as the little girl's story had just described. His lips trembled. His heart felt gripped tight, as if by an invisible hand. Maya nearly leapt from behind the counter. Her voice broke. "Sophie, come here." But the child only kept staring at Ethan, her eyes brimming with innocent trust. "Is it you? The man from Mommy's stories?" The bookstore was utterly still. Only the ticking of the wall clock and the frantic thud of Maya's heartbeat filled the space. Maya knelt, her trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Go back to your seat, darling." Sophie obeyed, returning to her chair, though she kept glancing back, her young eyes glowing, as if trying to carve the man's face into memory. Ethan still stood frozen, the gloves in his hand having slipped to the floor unnoticed. He lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Maya. The distance between them was only a few steps, yet 5 years of past wait pressed them into the small room, as if the rest of the world had vanished. "Maya," he said hoarsely, a voice like an echo from another life. She drew in a sharp breath, forcing her spine straight. But her hand hidden in her apron curled tight into a fist. The faint scent of pine from his coat, an old fragrance she thought long gone, drifted toward her. "Customers are waiting," she murmured, her tone steady to the point of cold. "Take a seat. When the shop closes, if you're still here, we'll talk." She turned away. The clink of cups, the rustle of paper resumed, but every motion was slower, heavier, as though each had to press through a dense layer of air. Ethan sat near the window. He did not touch his phone, only stared out through the glass blurred with snow. Sophie hugged her storybook, sneaking glances, her lips moving as she whispered to herself, 1, 2, 3. Ethan heard it. He tapped 3 fingers gently against the wooden table. A fractured smile flickered on his lips, both aching and tender. Behind the counter, Maya's hand brushed the drawer where the notebook with the envelope still lay hidden. She pulled back quickly, as though burned. Outside, snow kept falling thick and white. Inside, the little room held its breath for 3 souls, a man who could not yet find words, a woman fighting to still her trembling, and a child who had just sown a question that forced them all to face the truth. The bookstore gradually emptied. The wall clock pointed to nearly 9 o'clock. Maya hung the closed sign on the door, the click of the lock echoing sharp and final like a stroke of fate. Inside, only 3 remained. Sophie had dozed off in the armchair by the window, clutching her storybook tightly. The golden lamplight fell across her small face, her long lashes casting soft shadows against her cheeks. In the hushed room, only the hum of the heater and the ticking clock could be heard. Maya stood behind the counter, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes fixed on the tiled floor so she wouldn't have to look at the man sitting across from her. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his overcoat draped loosely over the armrest. He looked nothing like the CEO from the papers. No power, no untouchable presence, only a man with weary, trembling eyes. He spoke first, his voice hoarse. I didn't know. Maya, I swear, I didn't know. She lifted her gaze, her eyes flashing with anger, shimmering with tears. Didn't know. Ethan. I waited, and in return, silence. 5 years of silence. Ethan bowed his head, his hands clenched tightly together. I never got anything. Every letter, every email, every call, my father intercepted them. He said it was for security when I moved to Wall Street, then London. He told me, you had left. Maya laughed, the sound fractured, broken with tears. Left? I sat every night before a screen, praying for just one reply. I held on to the envelope you gave me, too afraid to open it, thinking that if I just believed you remembered me, I could endure it. And while I carried a growing belly alone, where were you? Across the ocean, letting your father decide everything for you. Ethan shot to his feet, stepped forward, then stopped just within arm's reach. His voice shook. I searched for you. I asked friends, the school, but every trace was gone. I even went back to the dorm. They said you withdrew. No one knew where you went. Maya, I swear, if I had known, I would have... She shook her head, tears streaming. Swear? Your promises left me to face every terrified night alone, every morning not knowing how to survive the next day. I had to choose between finishing school and keeping the baby. And I chose. I chose our daughter. The air thickened. The ticking clock sounded unbearably loud. Ethan's gaze shifted to Sophie, curled in sleep. Her curls spilled across the cushion. He sank to his knees beside her chair, his large hand trembling as he reached out, brushing the tiny fingers clutching the book. This little one is ours? He whispered, his eyes brimming. Maya nodded, her voice steady though her lips quivered. Yes, this is Sophie, your daughter. She's 5 years old. Ethan held her hand tighter, his eyes blurred. It felt as though the world tilted, collapsing into this single moment. He whispered, I missed her first steps, her first words. God, I missed it all. Maya turned away, no longer furious, only heavy with sorrow. She pulled an old notebook from the drawer behind the counter, laid it on the table, and opened to the middle. The yellowed envelope appeared, still sealed. I never opened it, she said, her voice breaking. Do you know why? Because I was afraid it only held goodbye. I kept it as if it were proof that you were still with me, at least in memory. And Sophie, she is the proof that love once was real. Ethan's hand trembled as he touched the envelope, his eyes shut tight as though fighting between pain and gratitude. Maya, I'm sorry. I can't reclaim the 5 years we lost, but if you give me the chance, I won't miss a single day again. She looked at him for a long time. In her tear-filled eyes, the burning anger had faded, leaving only the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. From the corner, Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, Mommy, the man from your stories. Both of them fell silent, their hearts pulled into the same rhythm. In the days after the night of truth, Ethan did not disappear as Maya had once feared. Every morning, when the shop owner unlocked the door, he was already there, bringing with him the lingering chill of Brooklyn's streets. No suit, no trace of the familiar CEO image, only a man with rolled-up sleeves, bending to stack heavy piles of books, dusting the high shelves Maya could never reach. "You don't have to do that," Maya said, her tone dry. "I know," Ethan replied simply, "but I want to." He didn't argue, didn't plead. He only stayed, patient, quiet, weaving himself into the rhythm of everyday life. At first, the regular customers eyed him with curiosity, but soon they nodded, whispering, "He looks like a father trying to make up for lost time." Sophie accepted him the fastest. On the very first day, she sat cross-legged on the floor with a comic book, looked up and asked, "Mr. No, Daddy. Will you read with me?" Ethan hesitated, as if afraid to shatter something fragile. Then he sat down beside her, letting her climb into his lap, his deep voice carrying each line. Sophie giggled, pointing at the illustrations. "Just like Mommy said, Daddy, you read so well." From that moment, Sophie clung to him. In the afternoons, she pulled his hand out onto the street, counting steps along the sidewalk. 1, 2, 3. Ethan laughed, scooping her up high when they reached 100. Maya, watching through the shop window, felt her chest tighten with both ache and tenderness. He had other small habits, remembering every customer's name, recalling the titles an old woman favored, knowing the exact cocoa order of a boy who stopped by after school. These little things made the shop owner chuckle. He's not just good at investments. He'd make a fine bookseller, too. In the evenings, Ethan carried Sophie up to the small apartment above. He tied her shoelaces, listened intently to her chatter about kindergarten. One night, Sophie sat on his lap, placed her tiny finger on the scar across his knuckle, and whispered, "Mommy said Daddy had this special mark, like a superhero." Ethan hugged her tighter, his eyes misting. "Daddy isn't a superhero, but Daddy will always be here." From the kitchen doorway, Maya watched. Part of her wanted to stop it, to remind herself that he had once vanished, once left her utterly alone. But another part, softer, more honest, felt that the little apartment had never been this warm. Even so, she kept her distance. When Ethan tried to help serve rice, she gently pushed his hand aside. "You're just a guest." "I don't want to be a guest," he answered quietly, but pressed no further. Maya turned away, shoulders rigid, yet in the reflection of the window, she saw him patiently adjusting Sophie's scarf, pouring water, doing all the unnoticed tasks no one had asked of him. Day after day, Ethan wove his presence with small acts. No grand promises, no noisy gestures of compensation, only his steady being there, the very thing he had lost 5 years ago. And Maya, no matter how hard she tried to resist, could not stop her heart from trembling each time she heard her daughter call out, "Daddy!" That Brooklyn afternoon was buried beneath an unusual depth of snow. Inside the bookstore, the heater spread its warmth, and Sophie sat coloring by the counter, her cheeks flushed pink. At first, Maya thought her daughter was only tired from playing outside too long. But then Sophie set her crayon down and whispered, "Mommy, I feel dizzy." Maya rushed over. Her hand touched Sophie's forehead, burning hot. "Oh, God." Her voice shook, her heart pounding wildly. Sophie slumped forward on the table, breath coming fast, her lips dry and cracked. "We have to get to the hospital now," Maya cried. She grabbed for her coat, but her trembling hands fumbled with the zipper. Outside, the snow was thick, buses sparse, and calling a taxi during a storm was nearly hopeless. "Give her to me," Ethan cut in, his voice firm. He was already at her side, shrugging off his overcoat and scooping Sophie against his chest. The little girl whimpered, her face flushed scarlet, sweat dampening his collar. "Ethan, we can't—" "Trust me." His words rang like a command, but his eyes glowed with desperate fear. Without another second, he wrapped Sophie in his coat, shielding her from the wind, and pushed the door open. The gale struck like knives. Snow whipped across their faces, stinging their eyes. He bent low, clutching the child close, striding step by step toward the main road. Maya followed, her legs sinking deep into snow, her heartbeat racing to the rhythm of his strides. The sight seared itself into her memory. The man who had vanished 5 years ago, now charging through a blizzard, clutching their daughter as if she were the only treasure left in the world. In the stark light of the emergency room, everything moved quickly. Doctors took her temperature, gave injections, settled Sophie on a small bed, white blankets tucked up to her chin. Maya sat beside her, clutching her tiny hand, tears falling in streams. Ethan, his shirt soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, remained on the other side of the bed. His rough hand rested gently over Sophie's, his voice low, steady, like a lullaby. There was once a little bear lost in the snowy woods. He walked and walked, thinking he'd never find his way home. But then he heard a small voice calling, and he found where he belonged. Sophie stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. Her parched lips moved. "Daddy." Ethan bent down, pressing his lips to her fevered forehead, whispering with a voice trembling yet resolute. "Daddy's here now. Daddy will never leave again." Maya stood still at the corner of the bed. The sight pierced her chest. No longer the man who had abandoned her 5 years ago, but a father, terrified of losing his daughter, clinging to her as if his world depended on it. In that moment, a shard of ice inside Maya cracked. Not forgiveness, not yet. But for the first time, she saw not the man who had left her, but the man who might stay. The storm had passed. Brooklyn returned to its usual noisy rhythm. Sophie slowly regained her strength, and once more the sound of her laughter filled the little attic above the bookstore. In the mornings, Ethan sat at the old wooden table, helping his daughter sound out each word. Watching them, Maya felt a tide of emotions rise. Strange, fragile, but undeniable. But peace did not last. On a Saturday morning, as Maya was shelving books, the bell above the door rang. A draft swept in with a tall figure in a dark gray wool coat. His hair was silver, neatly combed, his eyes sharp and cold. Each step seemed to press the air tighter in the small shop. Maxwell Blake. Maya recognized him instantly. The face she had only glimpsed once at that extravagant gala years ago, with eyes that made her blood run cold. And those eyes had not changed. They judged, measured, as if appraising a flawed commodity. "Father," Ethan exclaimed, hurrying forward from the back. They stood face to face in the narrow aisle of the bookstore. The father straightened, hands in his coat pockets, his voice deep, carrying the weight of command. "We need to talk." Maya froze. Sophie, coloring by the window, looked up curiously. Maya immediately moved to gather her into her arms, whispering, "Go upstairs and play, sweetheart." The girl nodded and bounded up the narrow staircase to the apartment above. Only 3 remained below. Maxwell wasted no time. "I've allowed you long enough to play this family game. It ends now. The company needs you back. Your path has no place for this distraction." His eyes flicked to Maya, sharp enough to cut her down where she stood. "You call the woman who raised my daughter for 5 years a distraction?" Ethan answered, his voice calm but his gaze blazing. "Who is she? A mere bookstore clerk? The girl who dragged you down in college? Do you think the board of directors will accept a woman like that beside the heir of Blake Industries?" Maxwell's jaw clenched tight. Maya gripped the fabric of her apron but said nothing. She knew that any word now would only become a weapon against her. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself squarely in front of her. His voice rang steady, each word like a vow. If I must choose, then I choose them. Maya and Sophie are my family. No board seat can ever replace that. Maxwell's brows furrowed, anger sparking in his eyes. You're throwing away everything I built. Legacy, power, respect. No, father, Ethan cut in, his voice rising, no longer wavering. I'm not throwing it away. I'm stepping out of a legacy that never once gave me the right to be happy. If the price of inheritance is losing my family, then I would rather lose it all. For a moment, the air thickened like lead. Maxwell's gaze burned sharp as a blade. Then he turned, his voice low and heavy. You will regret this. The door shut behind him, leaving the bookstore in weighted silence. Maya stood behind Ethan, her hand pressed to the edge of the shelf to steady herself. Her heart pounded, not because of Maxwell's words, but because of the way Ethan had stood before her, without hesitation, without retreat. Ethan turned, the fire still alive in his eyes. I don't want to lose you ever again. Maya did not answer, but when she looked up at the staircase where Sophie peeked down with a child's smile, her own eyes shimmered with tears. Perhaps for the first time, she believed Ethan was not just speaking empty words. That night, after Maxwell left, the bookstore sank into a heavy silence. Maya sat at the small wooden table, the yellow desk lamp casting its dim light onto her tightly clasped hands. Her heart kept replaying the image of Ethan standing before her, declaring he would give up everything to choose her and their child. She should have felt at peace. Instead, a rising tide of fear gnawed at her. He had everything, a secure future, an empire to inherit. And now he said he would abandon it all for her and Sophie? Maya looked around the small attic, the peeling walls, the wobbly table, the faint scent of old books. This was where she had struggled to raise her daughter, a tiny world she had tried to make safe. But compared to the skyscrapers and velvet-carpeted boardrooms where Ethan belonged, this place was nothing more than a dim, makeshift corner. I cannot let him lose everything because of me. Sophie was fast asleep in the bedroom, clutching her worn teddy bear. Her breathing was steady, her face serene, untouched by the battles of adults. Maya sat gently at the edge of the bed, stroked her hair, and whispered, My love, I have to do this to protect your father. She returned to the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out paper and pen. Her hand trembled, but each word emerged clear, resolute. Ethan, you have already given me more than I ever dared to dream, simply by coming back. You gave Sophie a father, and gave me a few brief days of reliving what we once had. But I cannot let you lose everything, your name, your career, your legacy, because of us. I love you. And because I love you, I choose to leave. Please believe me. I have no regret in letting you know about Sophie. She needs to know who her father is. But from here on, continue your path. Do not let us be the reason you lose it all. Maya. Tears fell, smudging the ink. Maya folded the letter and placed it beside a photograph of the three of them taken in the bookstore. Sophie beaming, Ethan bending down to fasten her wool scarf. She packed a few clothes into a bag, wrapped Sophie in her coat while the child still slept, and carried her out of the attic. Outside, the snow had ceased. The streets lay hushed under golden lamplight. Maya walked on, her heart squeezed in pain, but her steps unyielding. The next morning, Ethan returned to the attic. He called Maya's name, called Sophie's. No answer. Only the folded letter lay waiting on the table beside the photo. He opened it. The trembling lines cut into his heart like a blade. His hand clenched, the page shaking in his trembling grip. Ethan bolted into the streets, running through Brooklyn's narrow roads, asking at bus stops and train stations. But Maya and Sophie had vanished like mist into the morning. In his coat pocket, the crumpled letter stayed with him. He read it again and again until the ink nearly faded, as if one more reading could somehow turn it into a lie. But the truth remained. Maya was gone. For days, Ethan roamed through Brooklyn and its surrounding suburbs. He stopped at bus stations, train depots, questioning strangers in a hoarse voice. In his coat pocket, Maya's crumpled letter remained, and in his memory, only the image of Sophie calling him Daddy tethered him from despair. One misty morning, sitting alone in his car, Ethan suddenly remembered a place: the rooftop garden at Columbia. The little terrace with ivy and blooming roses where he and Maya once sat beneath string lights, sketching out a simple future. His heart pounding, he drove straight to the campus. And there, he saw them. Maya sat on an old wooden bench, her face worn but still gentle. Sophie ran in circles, giggling as she chased a white butterfly. "Maya," Ethan called, his voice hoarse, as if afraid to disturb a dream. She turned. In that instant, tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, I can't let you lose everything because of us." He stepped closer, shaking his head firmly. "You're not a burden. You're the only regret I've ever had. I lost you once. I will not let it happen again." Ethan reached into his pocket and drew out a small, worn velvet box. When he opened it, the glint of a simple but exquisite ring made Maya freeze. He dropped to one knee on the damp stone, his tear-filled eyes lifted to hers. "This ring should have been yours 5 years ago. I've carried it with me everywhere since. Maya Carter, will you give me the chance to finally do what I should have done long ago?" Maya covered her mouth, tears streaming. Inside, her heart was torn, but her trembling shoulders came not from fear, but from a painful relief. "I kept an envelope of yours for 5 years," she sobbed. "I never opened it. I was afraid it only held goodbye. I held onto it like a dream I couldn't let break. But today I realize that dream never truly died." Sophie came bounding over, wrapping her arms around her father's neck, exclaiming with pure delight, "Daddy, we're a family now, aren't we?" Ethan hugged her close, his eyes never leaving Maya. "We are a family, if your mommy says yes." Maya knelt beside him, her trembling hand resting on his holding the ring. "Yes, I do." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. Sophie squealed with laughter, her little arms wrapping around them both. From afar, the Columbia building stood as witness, while the old envelope tucked in a Brooklyn attic remained unopened, and perhaps would never need to be. Because now, the truth that mattered most was alive before them. They were a family. The wedding was not grand, only a weekend afternoon in a Brooklyn park. Bare tree branches held strings of lights, ready to glow when dusk fell. A small circle of friends, neighbors, and bookstore regulars gathered, their faces radiant with joy. Maya wore a simple white dress, her hair tied neatly, adorned only with a small rose. Ethan stood waiting at the end of the aisle, his navy suit perfectly fitted, the old letter Maya once left still tucked in his pocket, a reminder of the road they had traveled. Sophie served as flower girl, tossing petals with such abandon that they fell in a messy trail, drawing laughter from all. When she reached her father, she chirped brightly, "Daddy, count with me, 1, 2, 3." Ethan smiled, tapping 3 fingers against the wooden stand. The vows they exchanged were short, but full of truth. Ethan said, his voice low and steady, "I promise to be present, at every dinner, every night of sickness, and in all the ordinary days too easily forgotten. I will hold your hand through it all." Maya replied, her voice thick with tears, "I don't need an empire. I only need a home, where you and Sophie are, and I will keep it with everything I have." When the rings were exchanged, the string lights flickered on, turning the park into a sky of stars. Sophie clapped her hands, laughing bright and free, then wrapped her arms around them as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The small celebration that followed offered only hot cocoa and cookies brought by the bookstore owner. No loud music, only an old love song playing softly from a tiny speaker. Ethan twirled Sophie in his arms, while Maya stood close, smiling through tears. In that moment, she thought of the unopened envelope still resting in the drawer at the bookstore, untouched and perhaps never needing to be opened. Because the unwritten story had found its ending. A family, simple yet complete. In a noisy world, where power and money so often dictate fate, there are still small stories that remind us happiness does not need grandeur to shine. Maya and Ethan lost 5 years, wandering through misunderstandings, unopened letters, and lonely nights. But in the end, they discovered that true love is not in grand promises, but in presence, in showing up for each other, and for the child whose smile could brighten an entire room. Sophie grew up on Mommy's stories, and it was her innocent heart that brought her parents back together. Sometimes it is the child's gaze that becomes the compass, guiding adults back to what they had lost. This story closes on a simple family, but within that simplicity lies everything: love, trust, and a promise never to abandon one another again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a small spark of light in their day. Who knows? Perhaps they too are on a journey to find their true home.